Timothy William Wiltsey was born on August 6, 1985, to Michelle Lodzinski and George Wiltsey. Wiltsey saw his son when he was a baby, but never again after that, leaving 18-year-old Michelle to raise him as a single mother. Saturday, May 25, 1991, was right in the middle of Memorial Day weekend that year. 23-year-old Michelle decided to take 5-year-old Timothy to the South Amboy Elks Carnival in Sayreville, New Jersey, about 5 miles from their home in South Amboy. Around 11 o'clock that morning, a neighbor spotted Timothy running up and down the street. It would be the last confirmed sighting of him. According to Michelle, Timothy was standing in line for a ride and wanted a soda. She got out of line to buy him one, claiming he was only 8 feet away from her. When she got back to the line, Timothy was gone. Michelle's niece, Jennifer Blair, and one of Jennifer's friends met up with Michelle at the carnival. When they got there, Jennifer said her aunt was just standing there. When she asked where Timothy was, Michelle said he'd been missing for 15 minutes, that she'd just turned around and he was gone. After Timothy was reported missing, the carnival was shut down in an attempt to find him. Investigators searched until 2 o'clock the next morning. The search resumed a few hours later at 5:30 a.m., and investigators searched the entire park where the carnival was located and 2 ponds. The search was called off at noon when investigators concluded that Timothy wasn't in the area. His disappearance would later lead to a nationwide manhunt, and his case would be featured on America's Most Wanted and on milk cartons. When his son went missing, George Wiltsey hadn't seen him in years and lived in Iowa, quite a ways away from Timothy's home in New Jersey. He was ruled out fairly quickly. But Michelle Lodzinski was considered a suspect from pretty much the beginning of the investigation. The day after Timothy was last seen, she was interviewed by police and gave them the story about him being gone when she came back from buying him a soda. A few days later, on June 7th, she was interviewed again and gave a different story. According to this story, Michelle had run into a woman named Ellen at the carnival, and Ellen was accompanied by 2 men and a child. Michelle claimed to know Ellen from a previous job she had at a bank, where Ellen would come in to cash her welfare checks. Michelle asked Ellen to keep an eye on Timothy while she got out of line to buy him a soda. When she came back, Ellen, the 2 men, the child, and Timothy were all gone. On June 13th, Michelle gave yet another slightly different version of events. Now she claimed Ellen and the 2 men approached her as she went to get a drink and pulled a knife on her. Other versions of her story had Timothy being taken by 2 men or abducted by knife point by a woman in a red car. After this story, Michelle said she originally hadn't told the truth because she was afraid Timothy's captors would hurt him if she did. Back on June 7th, Fred Bruno, who was Michelle's boyfriend at the time, had told police that she told him another similar story to this. This time, however, she told him a woman pulled a knife on her and abducted Timothy while she was on her way back to her car to get more money for rides. And there was one major problem with every version of Michelle's story. There was no proof Timothy was ever at the carnival that day in the first place. Carnival workers and a few people who had been in the park that day told police they'd seen a boy who resembled Timothy, but these sightings have never been confirmed. No witnesses definitively reported seeing either Timothy or Michelle there that day, and there was no evidence of or witnesses to Timothy's alleged abduction. The following month, police searched Michelle's financial records to see if she'd had any sort of financial gain after her son's disappearance, possibly from something like selling him. Nothing was found. Her car, apartment, and garbage were searched, but again, these searches led to nothing. A few months later, in October of 1991, A man bird watching in a marshy area of the Raritan Center in Edison, New Jersey, found a child size 13 Ninja Turtle sneaker. This sneaker matched the description of the shoes Timothy was wearing when he disappeared. In April 1992, the area was searched again by investigators. The matching sneaker, a pillowcase, a blanket, some clothes, a balloon, and 11 bones, including a skull, were all found in the search. The skull was identified via dental records as belonging to Timothy Wiltsey. 11 months after going missing, his partial remains had been found. Michelle Lodzinski had worked in a building at the Raritan Center from September 1988 to March 1989. The building was less than half a mile from where Timothy's remains would be found, and a former coworker said she used to take walks around the area on her lunch breaks. This was presumably said to imply that she knew the area well. Michelle had never told police that she had ever worked there. Timothy's death was ruled a homicide, but the medical examiner couldn't determine his cause of death. A forensic examination of his remains revealed no evidence of trauma. Michelle Lodzinski later moved to Minnesota and then to Florida. She later began working as a paralegal and had 2 more sons, Daniel and Benjamin. Michelle told her sons that they had a brother named Timmy who had died, and they played with toys that used to belong to him. In 1995, Michelle pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI after claiming she'd been kidnapped the year before. She was sentenced to 3 years probation. In 1997, she was sentenced to 3 more years probation after stealing a laptop from her employer. Because she was already on probation at the time from her false kidnapping sentence and had obviously committed a crime by stealing the laptop, she spent 24 hours in jail for violating her original probation. Investigators eventually started looking into Timothy's case again. One source said this was in 2011, another said 2014. This time, they turned their attention to the blanket that had been found near his remains. At the time it had been found, Michelle had told police she didn't recognize it, and there were no forensic links between her and the blanket. But Michelle's niece Jennifer, who was estranged from her aunt by this point, identified the blanket as one she'd seen in Michelle and Timothy's house while she was babysitting Timothy. On August 6, 2014, what would have been Timothy's 29th birthday, Michelle Lodzinski was arrested and charged with murder in his death. She was sent to prison in Florida and held on $2 million bail. Her trial began in March 2016 in New Jersey. She pled not guilty. Prosecutors said Michelle killed Timothy because he was a burden and was getting in the way of the single, carefree life she wanted to live. They claimed Timothy was killed sometime after the last sighting of him at 11 a.m. on March 25th, and that his body was then wrapped in the blanket and taken to the swamp. On May 18, 2016, Michelle Lodzinski was found guilty of murder. She was later sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As many people convicted of a crime do, Michelle tried several times over the years to appeal her conviction. In February 2020, the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed to hear her case. On December 28, 2021, they overturned her conviction. According to the law, in order to find homicide, it had to be proven that Michelle purposefully or knowingly caused Timothy's death. 4 of the justices didn't agree that her case met the standard. According to their ruling, the court finds that a rational jury, considering the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, could conclude that Lodzinski did not take Timothy to the carnival, and that she had some involvement in his disappearance, death, and burial. But only the purposeful or knowing causing of death constitutes murder, and the prosecution offered no direct or inferential evidence that Lodzinski purposefully or knowingly caused Timothy's death. Michelle was released from prison later that day and was expected to return to Florida. She can't be retried for Timothy's murder. So what happened here? Was Michelle Lodzinski's release a miscarriage of justice, or is there really not enough evidence to convict her? Let's take a look at what people are saying. Many people discussing this case online believe Michelle really is guilty. They cite her numerous lies to police, including the lie by omission about working at the Raritan Center so close to where Timothy's remains were found. There was also the false kidnapping claim a few years later, which was actually left out of the trial. There was also the fact that nobody could actually prove she and Timothy were ever at the carnival. There was also the blanket that was found so close to Timothy's remains and reportedly came from his home. Timothy disappeared at the end of May, and it was hot outside, hot enough to make it unlikely that he would be carrying around a blanket. Is this evidence that the blanket really was used to wrap up his remains? Others are skeptical and cite a lack of evidence as the reason why the conviction may have been overturned. There was no physical or forensic evidence ever found linking Michelle to Timothy's death. The case was largely, if not entirely, circumstantial. A few people pointed out that the blanket might not have even belonged to Timothy. After all, blue blankets for children aren't exactly rare, and some believe Jennifer's identification of the blanket may have been incorrect. According to detractors, it's also possible that Timothy's death was actually accidental, even though it was ruled a homicide. Remember, there was no evidence of trauma to Timothy's bones, and his cause of death couldn't be determined. Despite the prosecutor's claims, there also doesn't seem to be any readily available evidence that Michelle resented being a parent or wanted Timothy out of the way, though it's possible this did come up in the trial. Still, when discussing the lack of forensic evidence, at least one online speculator noted that most cases don't have a so-called smoking gun, and we shouldn't necessarily expect them to. Is the circumstantial evidence enough to rule Michelle guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? It seems nobody can really agree on this. There is one more thing I want to bring up. In my research, a lot of journalists and investigators noted that Michelle didn't show the emotions or reactions they would expect a grieving mother to have. She reportedly went on vacation to the Bahamas right after Timothy's disappearance, and apparently didn't appear very sad or emotional in public. However, others pointed out that everyone grieves in different ways, and that just because you don't outwardly see signs of grief or sadness doesn't mean they're not there. So there are obviously a lot of opinions here on both sides of the argument. This case reminds me of Kaylee Anthony in a lot of ways. Both cases involved young, single mothers. In both cases, the mother was caught in numerous lies after her child went missing. Partial skeletal remains were found of both children, making it difficult, if not impossible, to determine their causes of death. And both mothers were ultimately not held legally responsible for their children's deaths, even though they both spent time in prison over them. Unfortunately, we may never know exactly what happened to Timothy Wiltsey in May of 1991.